Okay guys, so today we're going to be talking about amino acids and protein structures. So we're kind of continuing on learning about biomolecules. Remember, we've learned about carbohydrates now, and we learned about lipids last lesson, and now we're going to learn about proteins. And then on Monday you have your lesson on the last biomolecule, nucleic acids. So today we're learning about proteins. Now, we've talked about with all the previous biomolecules, carbs and proteins, there's kind of building blocks, and then you put these building blocks together and then they create a larger molecule. So for carbohydrates, remember we had the simple sugars and then a bunch of simple sugars linked together to form the complex carbs like starch and cellulose and that type of stuff. So remember we had like the simple sugars, and they would all link together like this. Oops. And they would all link together, and they would end up forming a complex carb. And then fats, remember we had the fatty acids had the head group, and then they had that hydrocarbon tail. And then so a lot of things, they'd have a few fatty acids, and they would be linked to another molecule here, so they would build into a different molecule. So the building blocks of lipids would be fatty acids. The building blocks of carbohydrates, so a lot of the complex carbohydrates would be the simple sugars. And with protein, the building block of protein is amino acids. So amino acids, like the building blocks of proteins. Building blocks of proteins. And so if you look over here, this is the structure of an amino acid. This is the general structure of an amino acid. Now there's 20 different amino acids. There's 20 different amino acids. And they all look like this. They all have this blue, green, and pink part. The only thing that's different between the 20 amino acids is their side chain. And R, that's not R. R just stands for a side chain. It's just a placeholder. And there's lots of different ones. Some of them are really big. Some of them are really small. And I'll show you a couple in a second. But the blue, the green, and the pink are all the same. This blue part is called the amino group. So the N and 2 H's is called the amino group. The pink part is called the carboxyl group, and then there's always this carbon in the middle, this carbon that is bonded to 4 different things. And you can see, right, one bond is always to the amino group, one bond is always to the carboxyl group, there's always this hydrogen right here, and then it's always bonded to an R group. So it's bonded to 4 different things, and that's always what happens in every amino acid. The amino group, the carboxyl group, and then this carbon that has 4 different bonds. And then all the side chains are different on all 20 amino acids. So we can look at a couple down here, right here. We have a couple different amino acids, and you don't need to know their names. So that's why I didn't even put the names down there. You guys don't need to worry about what all the 20 are called. If you take like cell biology, or something like that in college, then you have to know them all. I had to know them all and had to know how to draw them all also. So these are just a couple examples. You can see here in the first one, right, we have our amino group. Right here, there's that nitrogen and 2 H's. We have the carboxyl group right here. All right, C double bond O, and then the carbon's bonded to an OH. And then we have this carbon in the middle that has the 4 different bonds. Now this one, this is the simplest amino acid. This R group is actually H, so it is bonded to 2 H's, but this counts as the R group. It's bonded to this H up here, and then the R group for this particular amino acid is H. Now if you look at this one, we still have that amino group, or excuse me, this is the carboxyl group. So this one, it's just flipped around, which is fine. This is the carboxyl group. This is the amino group on this side this time. And that's okay, you can do that. Here's that H that's always bonded to the center carbon. And then down here, this would be the R group. This R group is CH2 and then an SH. Right, so all the R groups are different. This is the R group for this amino acid. Now, an important thing to note about these R groups is that they all will have different properties. Some of the R groups will be polar and hydrophilic. Remember, polar means there's a charge, and they're polar. They're also hydrophilic. That means they like water. They want to be around water. And there's some that are non-polar and hydrophobic. Remember, if a molecule is non-polar, that means it's hydrophobic, and that means it does not want to be around water. If you remember from the lipids and how that creates your cell membrane. So the R groups all have different properties. Some are polar, some are non-polar, some are acids, some are bases, and so that affects how all the amino acids come together, and it's kind of what gives proteins their different properties. Proteins can be very different, and a lot of the reason why proteins can be very different is because there's different R groups. There's 20 different amino acids, and they all have a different R group. Okay, so moving on, a peptide, if you hear the term peptide, is the term for when two amino acids bond together. So if we look here, here's one amino acid, here's another amino acid, and we can see here's the amino group on this one, here's the carboxyl group, here's the H that's always there, and here's the R group. Remember, this is the same as this one over here. The R group is just an H. It's the simplest amino acid. And it's bonding here. You don't need to know this reaction, but you just need to know when two amino acids come together, you can see this bond. This is a new bond that formed between this carbon and this nitrogen. So when two amino acids come together, it's called a peptide bond. Peptide bond is what holds two amino acids together. That's the name of that bond. When two amino acids or any amino acids are bonded together, it's called the peptide bond. And then this whole thing here, just two amino acids, there's a different name if there's more than two. It's called the peptide. So it's important to know this is a peptide bond when two amino acids are bonded together, and then this whole thing, two amino acids, is called a peptide. Now when there's more than two amino acids bonded together, we get this right here, a long chain of amino acids. And these letters are just abbreviations for the names of different amino acids. And this is called a polypeptide. That should make sense. If this is called a peptide, poly just means many. So it's like many peptides. There's lots of amino acids bonded together, and they're all in a line like this. And then to make a protein, one or sometimes more polypeptides, depend, and you'll learn more about this next lesson. It's got to be at least one polypeptide. Some proteins have more than one. They fold up and they come together and they make a certain shape, and then that would be a completed protein. Now on to protein function. So proteins are really, really important in the human body, and they have a large variety of functions. Number one, it's number 0. Number one, they're enzymes. Enzymes are super important. They help chemical reactions occur. So most chemical reactions, or many chemical reactions in our body, could not occur without enzymes. Enzymes are like helpers that make chemical reactions happen, or they make the chemical reaction happen a lot faster. There's lots of things in our body that might happen, or they would happen, it would just be really slow. And so enzymes make those reactions go a lot faster at the speed that our body needs them to happen. Number 2, proteins play a role in structure and support. So a lot of structural components of animals' bodies and our bodies have protein in them, and you can think of some things like your nails and your hair is made from a lot of protein, right? And then 3, play a role in transportation, help transport substances. And an example there, hemoglobin. We've talked about hemoglobin before. If you remember, hemoglobin, it's a protein, and it's in our red blood cells, and that's the protein that actually carries the oxygen. So without hemoglobin, our red blood cells could not carry oxygen anywhere. So it helps to transport oxygen. Without that protein, we would not be transporting oxygen. Number 4, muscles and movement. Movement, I'm going to abbreviate movement with a MOV''T. So protein plays a role in muscles. Proteins, the myosin and actin, are how our muscles contract. Without proteins, our muscles would not contract and we wouldn't be moving. And number 5 is immune system. Most of our immune cells are protein, or a large part of them are protein. Without protein, our immune system would not work and our immune cells would not function properly. So protein, very important biomolecule.